Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Monday, July 28th, 2025, episode 449, and we're going to talk about how Jeffrey Epstein makes anarchy really appealing. This is actually the second time I'm recording this. I was almost done recording it the first time, and my wife just came in the room and they tell me that a landscaper had just pulled up and yeah, so ruined the recording. So I'm starting it all over again. But here we go. So I just listened to a podcast episode with George Gammon. He was talking to Robert Barnes. I guess I missed it when it first came out, but they were talking about the Epstein case, but they didn't mention some of the developments that happened over the weekend. So it must have been from last week. And the title of the episode is Real Epstein Cover-Up Story Too Dangerous for the Public to Hear. And that basically is to telegraph and to let everyone know they're going to talk about why the cover-up was just so badly done. So basically, the entire deep state, multiple country cooperation for power was about to be revealed. And because all the intelligence agencies are going to be implicated of the West, if all that comes out, then you would probably have some sort of revolution, something on the magnitude of the French Revolution where they're chopping people's heads off. So I'm like, yes, please. Which is curious. This is a side note now that I'm recording it a second time around. A lot of stuff which I didn't mention the first time around, I'm going to put in here. Wouldn't it be really interesting that Russia is targeted so as much as it is because it refuses to participate in the kinds of things that they're doing here in the West? Wouldn't that be interesting? Which would kind of change a lot of what people are saying about Putin, etc. And I've said before in another episode, if you didn't hear it, that wouldn't it'd be interesting if Putin wasn't the bad guy? That the only reason why a lot of people think he was a bad guy was because he worked for the KGB, which is basically the CIA, okay? And then a lot of the people that he killed or had executed or somehow was responsible in their killing were all those people who were working for the United States, right? So enemies of their state. And so obviously from the perspective of the United States, that makes Putin a really bad guy, but he makes Putin a hero to nationalists or pro-Russia people in Russia. So that's one way of looking at it, especially given how evil this whole Jeffrey Epstein thing is. I don't want to know, but just hearing the little bits that I have, it's just so crazy. Also, they mentioned how P. Diddy was somehow the American version of Jeffrey Epstein, which, wow, it just is pretty crazy, right? So, I thought it was also interesting that in order to distract people from the Epstein file thing event, they gave up Obama. You know, I thought that it must be really big if, in order to get people to stop talking about Epstein, they're going to offer up Obama and treason and election meddling and all this other kind of stuff. Um, and I think they're willing to do that because the statute of limitations for some of the offenses have already expired. So you might be able to pull it all out, but there's nothing you can really do about it, right? So I've already said that I doubt anything will even come from the whole Obama was involved with the Russiagate thing. Nothing ever does. So I'll be glad to be wrong, but I doubt anything will really happen. So the explanation as to why the cover-up was so bad, right? Because normally the cover-up procedure is to say, oh, this is so serious, we need to have a special investigator, and then it drags on for 5 years or 10 years, and then everyone forgets about it, right? So the reason why they didn't do the standard cover-up operation is because they were getting pressure from somewhere, from someone, and so they had to send a clear message to everyone all over the world. You don't have to cancel your travel plans. You won't be arrested at the airport. We're not going to go ahead with this, right? And so they needed to make it it's such a clear way that, and they didn't have enough time for the cover up. Which kind of shows how idiotic all of the people in power are. I mean, I thought that this was one of the reasons why they tried to assassinate Trump, like the one time in Pennsylvania, because he was talking about things he shouldn't be talking about, right? And so, wouldn't it make sense that as soon as he takes office, someone goes to the White House and says, "Yo, Trump, you can't talk about this anymore." But no, they kept going with it until it's too late, and then they have to do this 180, which is just, I don't know. uh it just shows how idiotic a lot of these people are who are pulling the levers of power. And I think that they only appear to be smart and intelligent because of secrecy and monopoly on force, monopoly on power, right? That is monopoly power over the military, over police, law enforcement, the justice system, blah, blah, blah. So because they are able to control all this stuff, they only appear to be geniuses or smart or playing 4D chess. But otherwise, they're just like you and me, not that bright. And especially if we get caught red-handed, then we become idiots so they become like idiots, just like everybody else, right? Like those two people who were caught on the Coldplay Jumbotron, right? Oh, we're so smart. Look at us. We're having an affair. No one sees us. Oh no, we're caught in the jumbo cam. And instead of just being cool about it, like maybe smarter people, they were so racked with guilt that they basically told everyone they're having an affair. And I heard that the one guy is trying to sue Coldplay. Well, I don't know. If that hopefully that'll be dismissed as a frivolous lawsuit. Um, and nothing comes from it. But anyway, so given how idiotic this whole Epstein affair is and just how evil it is, really, um, I have to say that I have to take advantage of this to push back against all those people who push against me because I would advocate defunding the government. I would advocate curtailing government power. I would push for cutting programs and agencies and bureaucracies. And people would always say, well, who would build the roads? Or how are poor people going to get food? They would say things like this. Well, and the news media bought and paid for by the government, they would call this, cost cutting government phenomena as austerity. Austerity, austerity is like you live like an Athenian in the lap of luxury in your robes, and now you're going to become a Spartan where all the sweet and yummy food is taken away and it's all MREs, right? Military rations, because you're now cutting back and tightening your belt. And so now everything has to be austere, and it reminds me of how history books will talk about the Gilded Age or the Progressive Era. And I've talked about that in previous episodes. I think there would be titles like Lessons from Eighth Grade History. But like the Gilded Age supposedly was a time of massive corruption. So on the surface, it looked golden and beautiful. All these people having wealth, innovation, all the poor people were coming out of poverty. And that's why people were trying to get to the United States from all over the world so they can have their own rags to riches story. But really, it was a time of corruption, right? And so they call it the Gilded Age. It only looked good on the surface, but in reality, it was just a ocean of corruption and evil. And then what comes after the Gilded Age is the Progressive Era. We're making progress, right? Life is getting better. And actually, Progressive Era is the era of big government, right? That's when the Federal Reserve was created, which meant lots of money printing and funding of all these government programs. And so they want people to believe that government action is good. And so they called it the progressive era. So it's interesting how they have come up with these labels to fool and mislead most of the general public. And then you make sure that all of the schools teach it a certain way so they continue to believe that the government is good. So cutting government means, however, less of this kind of garbage, right? If you didn't have a government with an unlimited printing press, then you can't have human trafficking funded by the government and covered up by the government, right? You can't have that. You can't have a private island where you can do all of the illegal criminal stuff that you want and never have to worry about legal problems. We would have less war. We'd have more individual personal freedom. We'd have more innovations. We'd have an improvement, a steady increase in the quality of life, right? Recently, the European Union passed the Digital Services Act, which is straight up censorship, but they're using it to basically cut back on misinformation that you would find on a place like X, right? Oh, look, people get to hear alternate narratives on X, and so we can't control them anymore. We can't lie to them as easily as we used to. And so now we have to go after X. So people cannot get access to alternate information, aka the truth. So the same people who lie, traffic underage girls and boys, who want continuous war, they want to be the source of information, especially information which lets everyone know what's good and bad, what's immoral and moral. They want to preach to you like this, right? So very much so, they're desperate to control the flow of information. I think it was Telegraph. The CEO of Telegraph was lured to France, and as soon as he landed, he was arrested, right? Because and I'm sure that conditions of his release was that he creates a backdoor, right? That the encryption is now for everybody else except for government, right? So the government can go in there and read what all the messages that everyone has been sharing with each other, right? So no privacy there. So the European Union really wants to do away with free speech and encryption so that they can rule over them more efficiently and better. There's no place to hide. So the whole Epstein affair uh, makes the argument for anarchy, that is freedom with small government, really strong, right? So all those students who would be upset because, oh my gosh, Department of Education, how do we teach the children? Come on, right? Or how will we build the roads? Or how will poor people get food? Well, they would get it a lot better and easier than the system that we have now. In other words, a lot of people will say, well, uh, there'll be so much crime. And I'm like, you have lots of crime now and government is in control. So, don't think that government is the solution. It's always going to be the source of a lot of the problems that you complain about today. So how can having an Epstein organization, right? And it's massive, right? That's why they had to cover it up, because the implications of it, if everyone knew, would lead to a revolution, right? So that is better than freedom. Have fun with that, right? I mean, I just don't buy it. That argument is lost on me. So this takes me to China. And unfortunately, I'm talking a lot longer than I did the first time around. Blame my wife. I'm going to pick up the speed though. So while we're wrestling with underage, or pedophilia or underage uh, girls and boys being trafficked just for blackmail operations, China has activated a thorium nuclear reactor. Now, I've talked about thorium before. I've talked about it all the time in my class. I even put it in my book that was published in 2016. So this idea has been around for a while. So the article that I'm quoting from is by Alex Ramirez from March 12th, 2025, from the journal Engineering, Engineer, INE, so the magazine for engineers, I guess. And the title is China's Thorium Nuclear Reactor, a game-changing energy breakthrough! Exclamation point. And I'll quote a couple lines. The first commercial thorium-fueled nuclear reactor. Unlike conventional uranium reactors, this molten salt reactor is meltdown proof, produces minimal long-lived radioactive waste, and operates using thorium, an abundant, safer alternative to uranium. And so I always talk about thorium, like people, and so when I bring it up in class, like, oh, nuclear energy, and people would say, oh, meltdowns, and this and that, and it's dangerous, and all that radioactive waste. And so I said, okay, let's use thorium. And everyone would look at me. And sometimes people would say, you just made that up, right? Because they're looking to make me look crazy and complain about me, get me fired, whatever. And they're like, you just made that up. I'm like, just Google it, man. There are entire websites, trying to raise awareness about thorium as an alternative to uranium. And I would bring it up. I would talk about it to talk about how information is produced and how the flow of information is controlled by special interest groups. Like, why is it that no public school in America talks about thorium, right? Uh, when they talk about nuclear energy, it's all about uranium, right? Why not thorium? Okay. Uh, but of course, special interest groups, think about all the uranium mines, all the uranium reactors, all of those ships that use uranium, okay, all of that stuff, right? All the people who profit from it. I don't know if you notice or follow it, but uranium mining and uranium, the commodity, has had recently some really big booms and busts, right? And so there are a lot of people profiting from the uranium phenomena. But if everyone turned to thorium, right, I would even wonder, right? Because, people are always afraid about Iran turning its uranium nuclear reactors into producing nuclear weapon type material. And I think I remember reading that thorium cannot be used for nuclear weapons. So that would be so I would even talk about that. I would like people would say, oh, but you don't want them to get nuclear weapons. Give them thorium then, for crying out loud. Let's be done with this. All right. I'm so over this. All right. And so we are basically talking about stupid things while the rest of the world, they get to innovate a lot more. Innovate information and technology, which probably the United States had long before China, but they just sat on it. They didn't do anything with it. So it brings me to the next topic, USAID. So I heard so basically Colbert Show was canceled, then The View was canceled. And someone made the connection. They said, well, USAID was, defunded. And now, hey, is it coincidence? Possible. It's possible. It's plausible, right? Maybe there is a connection. I don't know. I didn't look at the books and obviously no one's letting us know. But I always knew that those shows, like the Colbert Show, The View, they're just so horrible, right? Like I realize that it's not just me that can see how horrible and unfunny and just how nasty uh, those programs were. And so in my head, I'm thinking they have to be getting subsidized, right? Someone is keeping those programs afloat. And so one might think, okay, maybe the corporations that on which they're being aired, maybe they're funding it. No, but they're for-profit corporations, and so they're not going to run them unless they're making money for them. Oh, USAID, so it's very plausible that the government was subsidizing these programs because they were basically propaganda outlets, right? Government propaganda outlets. And so, but how? Like, what was the vehicle that they were using to funnel money to these shows so that the average person doesn't even think that that we're actually paying for our own propaganda? And the downside also is that it enabled and excuse me, it allowed a very vocal minority to think that they actually had a majority, right? So it was fuel for the useful idiot. So not only are we funding pedophiles, we're funding genocide, wars where entire generations are wiped out, and we're paying for misinformation for what? What do we get for all of this luxurious spending that we're engaging in, right? Through the big, beautiful bill, a lower standard of life, right? People are getting anxious, uncertain about the future. They're all about emotional decline. So that's what you get with a big government. And those are the people that are upset when I say, let's go back to freedom and autonomy, right? So who are the people who would push back against me when I would say that? That would be authoritarians and lazy people, okay? Authoritarians are the politicians and the political activists, right? They want to control your life. They are the people who think they know how to control your life, right? And then who are the lazy people? Well, those are the intellectuals who work at universities, right? They don't want to work. They just want to talk all day and basically show other people how smart they are because they have a PhD. Okay, those are the lazy people. So you got authoritarians, politicians, and university intellectuals. Activism would no longer be a thing, right? If we had freedom, there wouldn't be activism because it's not like, because what's activism? Activism is just talking to, right? I don't have a solution, but I'm upset with what you're doing right now. If in place of activism, what you would have is basically people acting on the ideas that they came up with, acting on the solutions that they came up with, right? And so there wouldn't be any political activism any longer, right? Because there's no one to complain against, right? There's no government entity protecting corrupt organizations anymore. All you have to do is start your own company and then prove that you have a better idea, right? So there are a lot of people who just want to be angry, who just want to be self-righteous, full of moral indignation. Um, and they need that. Otherwise, what would they do with all their time, right? Uh, so people who want to be angry all the time would get angry because I showed them why they didn't need to be angry. I don't know. I always thought it was kind of interesting. But anyway, the message I have is that get over it. Be happy. Learn how to be happy. Find something that makes you happy and then leave me alone. And that's how I always basically end my class. Tell everyone, just that's all I want. Just leave me alone. You'd be so busy being happy in your life that you would not care about what I was up to. And that's the way I like it. And that's it for this episode. I will talk to you next time.